arrogance is not a personality trait. It is a confession, an admission that somewhere beneath the tailored suits and the corner offices and the carefully curated contempt for ordinary people, there is a man who is terrified of being ordinary himself. Marcus Hale had never learned that lesson. He had spent 47 years ensuring that no one would ever teach it to him. The dining room of Vantage, Chicago's most quietly devastating restaurant, did not announce itself. There were no velvet ropes, no glittering marquee, no doorman in a top hat. There was only a brushed steel door on the 14th floor of a Michigan Avenue tower, a reservation system that required a 6-month wait and a referral from an existing member, and inside, 12 tables bathed in the amber glow of custom Italian pendants that cost more per fixture than most Americans spent on a semester of college. The tablecloths were hand-pressed Belgian linen. The silence between conversations was so deliberate it felt engineered. This was not a restaurant. It was a ceremony. Nadia Vasquez had worked at Vantage for 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days. She knew this, not because she was counting down to something, but because her father's hospital admission date fell on the same week she had first tied on the restaurant's signature dark green apron, and some numbers branded themselves into your memory, whether you asked them to or not. She was 31 years old, dark-haired, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned very young that composure was not the absence of feeling. It was decision to feel it quietly, on your own time, when no one was watching. What the guests at Vantage did not know, what they had no reason to consider as she refilled their water glasses and recited the evening specials in her measured, unhurried voice, was that 3 years earlier, Nadia had been finishing a master's thesis in art history at the University of Chicago. Her focus was Northern Renaissance panel painting, specifically the authentication and attribution of works from the workshop of Jan van Eyck and his contemporaries. She had spent 18 months in a basement archive in Bruges, cross-referencing pigment analyses and ground layer compositions with a fluency that made her thesis advisor call her the finest eye for 15th century Flemish technique he had encountered in 30 years of teaching. Then her mother's diagnosis arrived: ovarian cancer, stage 3, aggressive. The treatment was extraordinary, and so was the cost. Nadia's father drove a city bus. Her mother had worked part-time at a dry cleaner for 20 years. Their insurance was the polite kind, present on paper, absent in practice. By the time Nadia came home from Belgium, the savings were gone and the second mortgage was drawn. She had withdrawn from the doctoral program the following semester, not dramatically, not with tears or a scene, but with a single email typed at 2 in the morning that she reread 4 times before sending, because she was afraid that once she sent it, she would feel the full weight of what she was giving up. She had felt it. She still did, on certain nights when the restaurant went quiet near closing, and she found herself staring at a painting on the wall. A small landscape attributed vaguely to a Dutch school, circa 1680, that she was reasonably certain had been misattributed by at least 2 generations of dealers. She had never mentioned this to anyone at Vantage. It was not the kind of thing you mentioned. Her mother was in remission now. Barely, carefully, 1 scan at a time. The medical debt was $178,000, spread across 3 institution group that sent paper invoices in cheerful cream envelopes, EAPs, as though the amount inside might be easier to receive if the packaging was pleasant. Nadia paid what she could every month and did not look too closely at the principal. She was thinking about none of this when Marcus Hale walked through the brushed steel door on a Tuesday evening in November. She was thinking about Table 9's soufflé timing and whether the couple at Table 3 was celebrating something, because the woman kept touching the man's hand in the particular way people touched hands when they were newly relieved about something. A diagnosis reversed, a deal closed, a fear retired. Marcus Hale was 52, with the square jaw and silver temples of a man who had been told he was impressive so many times that he had stopped questioning whether it was true. He ran Hale Capital, a private equity firm that had made its considerable fortune acquiring mid-sized regional businesses, extracting their margins, and moving on. He was accompanied by two men, Derek Purcell, his chief financial officer, a damp-looking man who laughed approximately one beat after Marcus laughed at everything Marcus said, and beside him, a woman named Christine Sue, the managing director of Mercer Arts Fund, one of the most significant private art investment vehicles in the country. Christine held a controlling interest in a portfolio valued at approximately $900 million. She was the reason Marcus Hale had booked this particular table at this particular restaurant, because Christine Sue, it was widely known in certain circles, preferred to conduct her most serious conversations in rooms that understood the value of silence. Nadia approached the table with the quiet authority that had made her Gregory's. The maitre d's, most trusted closer for difficult guests. She introduced herself. She offered still or sparkling. She began to describe the evening's tasting menu with the practiced cadence of someone who had long since memorized not just the words but the rhythm, the pauses, the precise moment to let a description breathe. Marcus looked at her the way he looked at most things that were not immediately useful to him, briefly, and with the specific variety of dismissal that does not even bother to register what it is dismissing. "We're not doing the tasting menu," he said, not looking up from his phone. "I'll order for the table." "Of course," Nadia said. "Whenever you're ready." He made her wait 4 minutes. She counted, because counting was something to do with the time other than feel it. When he finally set his phone face down on the tablecloth, he looked at her directly for the first time. Something shifted in his expression, a calculation, small and quick, the kind that happened in the back of a certain kind of mind when it sensed an audience worth performing for. "Tell me about the art," Marcus said, gesturing toward the wall behind her. Nadia turned. He was indicating the small landscape she had noticed on her first week, the one misattributed to the Dutch school. Beside it hung two larger works, an abstract bronze-framed canvas the restaurant had acquired from a Chicago gallery 6 years ago, and what appeared to be, from a distance, a 17th-century Italian devotional piece. The large canvas on the left is by a Chicago-based artist, part of the restaurant's ongoing support of local work, Nadia said. The piece beside it is listed in our collection notes as a devotional panel, Italian, circa 1640, though the attribution in the notes is somewhat general. "Somewhat general," Marcus repeated, with the tone of a man who had found the loose thread he was looking for. He smiled at Christine Sue with the particular smile of a man who is about to make someone look small for his own benefit. "What do you think that means, coming from a waitress?" Said nothing. She had the quality of very still water. You could not immediately tell how deep it ran. "There's a Flemish piece as well," Marcus continued, leaning back in his chair. "Third panel. Small one. Far right." He looked back at Nadia. "What can you tell me about that?" He said it the way people say things when they already know the answer, and are asking only to expose the gap between what they know and what you know. He had spent 40 minutes that afternoon in a conversation with an art dealer friend who had mentioned the piece, then mentioned, in fact, that it was attributed to the circle of Gerard David, a late 15th century Flemish master. Marcus had retained this information for exactly this kind of occasion. Nadia looked at the small panel. She had looked at it many times. It was approximately 40 centimeters wide. The The support appeared to be oak, with the particular thinness common to Flemish panels from the late 1400s. The subject was a Madonna and Child of the period, rendered in the compressed, jewel-like palette of the period. The gold in the Madonna's robe had the specific warmth of lead-based pigment, rather than the cooler tones that became common in the 16th century. The donor's hands were folded in the lower left corner with the characteristic anatomical precision of the Bruges workshops, not the idealized softness of the Italian schools, but a slightly angular, intensely observed realism that the Flemish painters had elevated to a kind of theology. She had also noticed the previous month that the créclure on the upper right quadrant did not match the rest of the panel. The aging pattern was subtly inconsistent, the fine line crazing that develops over centuries in genuine egg tempera had a slightly manufactured regularity in that corner that nagged at her every time she passed it. The panel on the far right is attributed to the circle of Gerard David, Nadia said. Late 15th century, Bruges. The compositional type, Madonna and Child with Donor, is consistent with Flemish workshop production of that period, and the pigment palette appears consistent with the era. Marcus's smile widened slightly. He had expected her to recite what the placard said, if there was one, or to look blank. She had done neither, but she also hadn't gone beyond what he'd told his friend in the afternoon. He glanced at Christine. She read the label, he said, pleasantly enough. There isn't a label, Nadia said. A small silence. Then she memorized the collection notes, Marcus said, a shade less pleasantly. The collection notes say Flemish school, late 15th century, attributed, Nadia replied. They don't mention Gerard David or the Bruges Gasques specifically. Marcus set down his water glass. His CFO had stopped laughing slightly ahead of schedule, which was a tell. Christine Sue had not moved, but she had the quality now of someone who had decided to pay closer attention. So where does that come from? Marcus asked. His voice had a new edge to it, not angry, not yet, but the edge of a man recalibrating. The elongation of the Madonna's fingers is characteristic of David's workshop specifically, Nadia said, and her voice had not changed at all. It remained the same measured, unhurried register she used for describing the fish course. There's also the treatment of the landscape in the upper register, that very particular atmospheric recession with the pale blue hills, which appears in at least 4 authenticated David panels. The donor's hands in the lower left are beautifully observed. Workshop quality, not master's hand, but high-tier workshop. She paused. I'd want to look more closely at the upper right quadrant, though. The créclure pattern doesn't sit quite right to me. The aging in that section is slightly too regular. It might be a later restoration, which is common and not problematic, or it might be something worth having a conservator look at. The silence at table 6 had a different quality now. Derek Purcell was looking at his water glass with the focused attention of a man who has realized he is witnessing something he does not have the vocabulary to process. Marcus Hale's jaw had not dropped. Men like Marcus did not allow their jaws to drop. But something in his face had gone very still, in the way that faces go still when the scaffolding of a performance has quietly collapsed, and the person inside has not yet decided what to do about it. Christine Sue unclasped her hands. She looked at Nadia with the direct, appraising attention that she normally reserved for works she was considering acquiring. The créclure observation, Christine said. Her voice was low and precise. You noticed that without taking it off the wall. I've had 2 years to look at it, Nadia said simply. What's your background? Christine asked. I'm a server at Vantage, Nadia said. Not defensively, not apologetically, just factually, before a brief beat. Art history, University of Chicago, then a research year in Belgium. I left the doctoral program. Christine nodded once, with the economy of someone who understood without requiring the rest of the sentence. Marcus recovered. This was what men like Marcus did. They recovered, and the recovery itself became an aggression. "So you're a failed academic," he said pleasantly, "poring over our walls between courses. That's a charming hobby." "Marcus," Christine said in a tone that was not a rebuke so much as a temperature reading, delivered flat, informational, like a thermometer, placed briefly against the conversation to let the number speak for itself. Marcus smiled. "Would you like to hear the evening's wine selection?" Nadia asked. Her voice had not changed. "Actually," Christine said, before Marcus could answer, "I'd like to hear more about the Créclure issue, if you have a moment. The restoration possibility versus the alternative." She said the word alternative with a careful neutrality that suggested she had already followed the thought to its destination and found it interesting. Nadia described it without drama, without flourish. The way you describe something you have simply looked at very carefully for a long time. The two-regular pattern in the upper right. The possibility of a skilled panel restorer filling a loss in the 19th century, which was common. The less comfortable possibility of a later addition to an original support, grafting a genuine fragment of an early panel into a newer composition to create a more complete and therefore more marketable work. It happened. It had happened to provenance collections more rigorous than a Chicago restaurant's. "It might be nothing," Nadia said. "A conservator with a raking light and a UV lamp would know in 20 minutes. Christine was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My fund acquired a Gerard David attribution 4 years ago. One of the institutions we considered had a panel with a similar irregularity that we ultimately passed on. Who authenticated the piece you acquired?" Nadia asked. Christine named an institution. Nadia recognized it, solid, conservative, the kind of authentication house that did not take risks with attribution. "Then you're probably fine," Nadia said. "Though if you ever want a second opinion on the Créclure, the Conservation Lab at the Art Institute does excellent technical analysis." She excused herself to check on the table's order timing. In the kitchen, the sous chef raised an eyebrow at her. "Table 6 okay? You were there a while. They got interested in the art," Nadia said, and picked up the bread basket. She did not hear what was said at table 6 in her absence. She learned some of it later from Christine's assistant, who called the restaurant the following week to leave a message for the server named Nadia. And the rest she reconstructed from what happened after. What happened, apparently, was this. Christine Sue had looked at Marcus Hale with the expression she wore when she had finished evaluating something and arrived at her assessment, and she had said, quietly, that she appreciated the dinner, but that she found herself needing some time to revisit a few elements of the proposal before they moved forward. Marcus had spent the remainder of the meal performing a version of himself that no longer had an audience. The message Christine's assistant left asked whether Nadia would be available for a phone call at her convenience. Nadia returned the call on Thursday afternoon, sitting in her car in the parking structure beneath her apartment building, because it was the quietest place she knew. "Yint," in her time. Christine's voice on the phone was the same as it had been at the table, low, precise, without the performance of warmth, but with something better, directness. "I had the restaurant's panel looked at," Christine said. "You were right. The upper right quadrant is a 19th century addition to a genuine early fragment. The fragment is real. Late 15th century. Flemish, quality workshop material. The addition is skilled, but it's not original. I'm sorry for the restaurant," Nadia said. "They paid for a complete panel. They'll have to make a decision about what to do with that information," Christine agreed. "That's not why I'm calling." She paused, not for effect, but in the way of someone choosing words with care because the words carry weight. I've been looking at your academic record. Your thesis advisor at Chicago, Professor Lindqvist, speaks about you with a specificity of praise that he does not extend to many people. I've also been speaking with the director of the Flemish collection at the Art Institute, who tells me you spent a week there last year looking at their early Netherlandish holdings and left written notes that he's referenced twice since. Nadia said nothing. She was not sure what response was appropriate to being seen this clearly by someone she had met 11 days ago. My fund is in the process of establishing a technical research partnership with 2 European conservation institutions, Christine continued. We need someone to lead the authentication review of a collection we're acquiring, approximately 60 works, primarily Northern Renaissance, with some gaps in provenance documentation that need rigorous scholarly attention. The position is a 2-year contract, based partly in Chicago and partly in Bruges and Ghent. Another pause. It comes with a salary of $220,000 annually and a research budget. The parking structure was very quiet. Somewhere 2 floors above her, a car door closed. Miss Sue, Nadia said carefully. I haven't finished my doctorate. I know. The contract includes a provision for you to complete it on a part-time basis, with the institution's support. Professor Lindqvist has already indicated he'd be willing to resume your supervision. Nadia had not cried in a parking structure before. She found that the acoustics were not ideal for it. The sound bounced back strange and close, but that it was also oddly private, which was something. Why? She asked finally. Not the practical version of the question. The real version. Christine was quiet for a moment, and when she answered, it was with the same economy she applied to everything. Nothing wasted, nothing withheld. Because in 30 years of working in this field, Christine said, I have met very few people who look at a panel painting from 15 feet away and notice what you noticed. That quality of attention is not something I can train. It is either present or it isn't. She let that sit, and because, Christine added, and her voice shifted just slightly, not softer, but more considered, what Marcus Hale did at that table was something I have watched people do to capable women for the entirety of my career. I don't require gratitude, I do require excellence, but I don't see any reason those 2 things should be in conflict here. Nadia drove home through the November streets with the heat on high and the radio off. She thought about her mother's last scan, the one that had come back clean in October. She thought about the cream envelopes in her kitchen drawer. She thought about a basement archive in Bruges where the light came in grey and diffuse through the high windows of a restaurant that had been quietly keeping a secret for over 100 years. Waiting for someone who knew how to look. She called her mother that evening. Not to tell her everything, that would take more time than a phone call, but to say that something had happened and that she thought, for the first time in 3 years, that they were going to be okay. Her mother asked what had happened. Someone saw me, Nadia said. Someone actually looked. Her mother was quiet for a moment, in the particular way of someone absorbing something they have been waiting a long time to hear. Baby, she said, you've been there the whole time.